Just over a half-decade ago, Aston Martin took the world by storm with a completely redesigned Vantage that, now looking back on those days, was the beginning of a whole new ethos and pathos for the brand. While Aston Martin has always stuck to heritage and tradition, they're a lot more than that now. They're more than just being synonymous with James Bond, being classy and sophisticated. They're now aggressive, sporty, and willing to take risks that we had never seen from this manufacturer, at least in the modern age. Because in 2024, we have the DBX 707, the DBS Superleggera, and DB12. And this entire lineup is a sight to behold, but also has a lot of performance that you wouldn't have associated with this brand in the past. But here we are with the 2025 Vantage, and everything now has come full circle. With the Vantage, Aston Martin wanted to create a Porsche 911 fighter, and they might have just done that with this new facelift and update. Under the hood, you still have that Mercedes-Benz V8, but there's a lot more power. But also, more importantly, for the interior, there's modern technology and a much more upscale driving environment that I cannot wait to dive into. In this video, we're going to check out the Aston Martin Vantage, and you'll be joining me as I experience this car for the first time. I absolutely love the Vantage, the pre-facelift model as well, and I've always felt that it was a great value in its market. But I have some questions, being an Aston Martin Vantage fanboy. Is the new Vantage a bit too expensive, but also, is there just a bit too much power under the hood for this to solely be a daily driver, or is it now a track toy? Well, we're gonna find out. Before we dive into this video, I want to give a huge shout and thank you to Aston Martin of Boston for letting me come down here to check out the 2025 Vantage. Their link will be in the description below, so you can check out their extensive Aston Martin inventory. So as always, let's begin with pricing. The Vantage for 2025 comes in at just under $200,000. Conveniently placing it in the same market as the Porsche 911 Turbo, and that's exactly what Aston Martin wants. The Vantage needs to go head-to-head with that 911, and they have a car priced to do so. Now, compared to the pre-facelifted model, you could have purchased one back in the day at around $180,000, $185,000. So the fact that you're already spending $200,000, that is a pretty significant increase. But when you factor in the new looks, the retuned V8 under the hood, and also new technology for the interior, but also a classy interior, at that, it only makes sense to have this car priced at that $200,000 price mark. But one thing I've always believed with the Vantage is that it's solely a grand tour. Even though people will argue and say it's a sports car, it balances being both luxurious and sporty at the same time, much like the Maserati Gran Turismo, the Mercedes-Benz AMG GT, or even a Bentley Continental. But I think now we can have the conversation and say, this really is a sports car. Getting into the road presence, I am absolutely enamored. In fact, I cannot stop staring at this car. I stopped by here at Aston Martin of Boston a couple days ago, and I really wanted to see what the street legal version was all about, because I had actually seen the new Vantage on a racetrack at Watkins Glen for the 6 hours of the Glen in both GT4 and GT3 form, and I'm like, you know what, I'm not yet sold. Then I came here and I'm like, this car completely makes sense. The whole design looks fantastic. When you take a look at the design, I think a lot of people are going to say it kind of looks like the 177, but also the DB12. And you're not too wrong with that. But I think this car goes a bit more deeper back to its heritage, where it kind of looks like the Vantage a couple generations ago, but also on the track in race car livery, it kind of has this old DB9 feel to it and look, which I think really is going to go a long way. And actually, if you are a fan of motorsport, Aston Martin has been very successful over the last 2 weeks, winning at Watkins Glen and also winning the 24 Hours of Spa, thanks to Lamborghini. But Aston Martin is really starting off very well with this new facelift. Now up front, you have a whole new look, which I think now makes the pre-facelifted model look rather old and somewhat mundane, because you have more aggressive headlights, you have a much larger front grille, and more importantly, you have vents on the hood, which is traditional to the Vantage nameplate, much like we saw a couple generations ago. What I also love too is the stronger body lines on the hood. This car now looks sporty, it looks exotic, it looks race ready, and I think that's why a lot of Aston Martin purists, or people who are looking for a car like a Porsche 911, like a Ferrari Roma, like even a Mercedes-Benz AMG GT, are going to find this car very appealing and may fall in love with it as well. Those larger LED headlights and the larger grille is exactly what buyers wanted to see. Back in 2018, that Vantage, a lot of people did not like that front grille, and there was aftermarket support to fix that, and also Aston Martin later on gave it a minor cosmetic facelift to have that more traditional vents. But also more importantly for me, it's the smaller details that really makes the pre-facelifted model look like a block that was sculpted very nicely, but there's not much substance to it. For 2025, there's a lot of substance, there's a lot of character here that Aston Martin addressed, but also makes this car look very unique in the Vantage heritage and family tree. Not only do you have that larger front grille, but you now have active side air curtains as well, which you did not have for the pre-facelifted version from 2018 to 2024. Now moving over to the side profile, we're going to address these tires in a minute, but more importantly is the side gills. If you remember, for the pre-facelifted model, you could go with a color matching side gill, you could go with gloss black, carbon fiber, or that more matte black look, which I was not a huge fan of when I first saw this car back in 2018. But now those side gills are a part of the front fascia and the front fender, and it goes a lot better with this car, especially for the facelift. Now more importantly, it's color matched from factory, but also you have a gloss black accent that runs through those side gills with Aston Martin written out in that small accent, which I think really adds a nice little touch to this car. Then matching the gloss black side mirror caps on our model, which are power folding and you do get blind spot detection, we have a gloss black running board that's more flush with the overall design of this car. It almost seems as though it's one piece with the middle portion of this car. If you remember, for the 2018 to 2024 model years, the front and rear fenders were much wider than the middle portion of the Vantage, so it wasn't as congruent or symmetrical, whereas this looks like it's one piece and looks very aerodynamic and aggressive, which you didn't really have for the pre-facelifted version. Much like last year, you still have the same door handles that do pop out once you press down on them. Again, flush with the overall design and will limit drag when you are on the track. Then returning to those tires, we have 21-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Michelin Pilot Sport S5 tires that we first experienced in the DB12. These tires were specifically designed for Aston Martin, and I can't wait to see what Michelin has in store in the near future, because this will most likely be making its way to your daily driver and sports car. Then as you make your way around to the back, you have a very similar rear fascia to what you had last year. And the reason why I say similar and not the exact same is that there's some very minor cosmetic details that may or may not go noticed. And actually, it makes this car look more race car oriented, like the GT4 and GT3, than what we saw for the pre-facelift. So same taillights, but for some reason, and it might be because these are smoke taillights, which are optional, they look thinner than they did last year. And also, with the duckbill spoiler, it seems like it's slightly more aggressive than it was before. It's more pronounced. And because of that, it reminds me of the GT3 and GT4 version. Exactly what Aston Martin was trying to exude and get out of this platform, where it is going to be track focused, race ready to go head to head with that 911. And just cosmetically, I think they've definitely done that. You can definitely tell that Aston Martin is going in their mature phase in the modern era, just from the design aspects and just the way this car sits on the road. This is a whole new chapter for the Aston Martin brand, especially for this platform, but also their lineup as well. Just like we saw last year, you're still going to have the gloss black accents, at least for this model, for the rear diffuser and the quad exhaust outlets, which I think have been enhanced for 2025. Everything looks bigger, sharper, and more aggressive than before. And lastly, and this to me has completely changed my perspective on the pre-facelifted version of the Vantage, you do have active vents on the rear bumper for both sides. And again, that adds some depth and character to the rear end, but also adds some symmetry to the overall design. We saw that for the front end. But again, those are smaller details that to me really showcases that Aston Martin is getting very mature and very bold with their styling rather than playing it safe with their body lines. Under the hood for 2025, you still have a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 engine sourced by Mercedes-Benz AMG, but it has been retuned, giving you 656 horsepower and 590 pound-feet of torque, which is a huge increase compared to the outgoing model, especially if you purchased a regular Vantage and not the F1 edition. To put all this into perspective, that's now a 153 horsepower increase compared to the outgoing Vantage, and also a boost of 85 pound-feet of torque. Now, I felt for the 2018 and 2024 model years, 503 horsepower and 505 pound-feet of torque was more than enough for a car in this class and for a car of this size. Now in the 600s, this is a completely different beast. This is now a car that is going to be more on edge. It's going to be sportier, more aggressive, but also more race focused. With this horsepower now, it is going to go head to head with the Porsche 911 Turbo, but also the Ferrari Roma and Mercedes-Benz AMG GT. Aston Martin now claims with this retuned V8 engine, you can now go to 0 to 60 in around 3 seconds, which would fall right in line with that Porsche 911 Turbo and other sports cars in this segment. Now, more importantly, Aston Martin has embraced the high horsepower figure era. Because back in the day, for 2 generations ago, you were looking in the mid 400s. Now we're at the 600 mark. And with the rest of the lineup, whether it's the DBX 707, which is the only trim for 2025, everything now is close to 650 or that 700 horsepower mark. And actually, with the Vantage, it's closer to the DB12 in regards to horsepower. So if you're looking for a sportier car rather than a Super Tourer or Grand Tourer, you're going to have that with the new Vantage. Stepping inside the Vantage for the first time, there's a lot to digest here because the driving environment, the way it's designed and laid out, is far different than what you had for the pre-facelifted version. Not a lot carries over from 2024, and this feels more driver-centric, driver-focused, but also sports car-focused as well. With the center stack and also the digital gauge cluster, this is much more modernized than what we had in the past. The argument could have been made back in 2018 to 2024 that the Vantage had a more outdated interior that couldn't compete with the 911, with the Ferrari Roma, with the Mercedes-Benz AMG GT. You really can't say that anymore because Aston Martin replaced all the old Mercedes-Benz technology with an in-house design that we first saw with the DB12. While the technology does carry over from that model, the way the interior layout is quite different. With the DB12, it feels more like a Grand Tourer, and for the interior, this is more of a race car design, especially with everything being within arm's reach, but also the way the dashboard is designed as well. And this is where I think the conversation begins to shift, where the Vantage is no longer an affordable Grand Tourer or that entry Grand Tourer in the lineup. This is now a hardcore track monster and sports car. So for the center stack, everything is within arm's reach, such as your dual zone climate control, your fan speed, your volume, also your 3 double heated and ventilated seats, your traction control on and off button. You can also control the exhaust note, your suspension, and then on the right you have the buttons for your camera systems. For the infotainment system itself, it is now a touchscreen with Apple CarPlay. Everyone wants to have Apple CarPlay now, and I'm glad to see that that is now standard. For our model, we also have the Bowers & Wilkins sound system, which will amplify the audio of your favorite music. One thing that really impresses me about this infotainment system is that for an in-house design, it's very responsive. It does remind me of some other user interfaces as well in this segment. The way the user interface is kind of reminds me of Audi's MMI user interface a bit, just the way the icons are laid out, but I definitely see some inspiration from rival manufacturers with this screen. But I love the fact that the resolution, quality, everything is just really high quality, and this is a huge step forward for Aston Martin moving forward, especially now that we're into the second half of the 2020s. So from the screen, you can control everything such as your drive modes. You can edit the drive modes, so such as individual mode. You can really customize the driving experience to your liking. Also, another thing too, you can customize the interior ambient lighting. You can go through different vehicle settings. Also, of course, you have onboard navigation, which is very high quality and easy to read. You can scroll through your music, your Bluetooth connectivity, and then your home screen, which again is very easy and very simple as well. Then quickly taking a look at the digital gauge cluster. So cool to see that we no longer have that older Mercedes-Benz technology. But using the haptic feedback buttons on the steering wheel, you can scroll through a variety of information, but also customize this layout as well and change it up to really personalize it and make it your own. You can scroll through your navigation map, your media, your phone, your vehicle. So from the vehicle settings, you can see your tire pressure monitoring system, also how many days to your next service, and your engine oil levels. From here, you can also display the navigation map. Again, we see this in a lot of manufacturers as well, so there is some inspiration from rival brands from this digital gauge cluster, but I like the fact that the resolution is really good as well, very much on par with other manufacturers in this segment. It also carries over to, such as those haptic feedback buttons, is your seat position buttons and also the buttons that are on your doors. that is not something that I would be complaining about or freaking out over, mostly because I think Aston Martin's primary goal was to really address a lot of the criticisms that people had for the pre-facelifted model. And they've definitely done that for the exterior design, but also the interior as well. And with the interior, you have very nice soft touch materials. I love the suede and Alcantara. Also with these seats, you have the Alcantara and suede inserts, which gives you a lot of grip. And that way, when you are on those winding back roads, you will not be swaying around too much when you are in those corners and you're on a very spirited drive, or maybe you're also on the track. The noteworthy aspect about the interior that I know a lot of people who have never driven a Vantage or DB12 are going to say, well, isn't this going to be just like the DB12? And absolutely not, because you have less headroom, and also the way the interior is designed, I feel like I'm in more of a cockpit, whereas the DB12 is more spacious, more wide open, and even the materials that were on the DB12 that I had featured last year, much more higher quality, more comfort focused, and really specifically tuned as a Grand Tour or Super Tour. To wrap up the front seating area, we do have a small center console, and here you'll find a 12-volt outlet and 2 USB-C inputs to connect your smartphone. And also this tray is going to be big enough for a smartphone or two, or maybe even a wallet. Then making our way around to the back one more time for the rear cargo area. I know this is overkill because most likely practicality is not a top priority for you, but just out of habit, I had to check it out. And back here, you're going to have right around 8.3 cubic feet of room. Again, this is not going to be a practical car at all. I think there's enough space to fit all the essentials if you are going to the racetrack or you're going on a road trip with a significant other. Obviously, this is not going to be a daily driver or family hauler, so that's not going to be too much of an issue at all. You might be able to fit a small bag of golf clubs, maybe. But if you are using this as a Grand Tour, you're taking it on a nice winding back road, maybe to another state or so, you're definitely going to have that space where you can have the luggage at least be back here. So just from that perspective, there is some versatility. There is going to be some of that daily usability, not up here in Massachusetts, but if you live down in Florida or California, this could most certainly be a great choice if you're looking for a car at around $200,000. So we're now behind the wheel of the Aston Martin Vantage. Huge shout and thank you once again to Aston Martin of Boston for giving me this opportunity to experience this car. They don't let anybody just come in and test drive their cars, especially non-customers, and mostly just because I've built up a great relationship with them, they've trusted me to take this car out, even though it has less than 100 miles on the odometer. So I don't want to take advantage of them and allow me to do this for this review. Now, my biggest question heading into this review was that is 656 horsepower too much for a car like this, especially in its price range and of its size and weight? And one thing I have learned 5 minutes in is that it's definitely manageable for sure. Even in Sport Plus with the growling of this V8, you don't need to get too deep into the throttle to get this car moving. Now again, we are going to be keeping this test drive very casual, so nothing too crazy. But one thing I have noticed immediately, having driven the DB12 less than a year ago, is that it most certainly doesn't feel like a DB12. Everyone's going to argue that, oh, horsepower-wise, it's up there with the DB12. It's not much less. But in regards to its mannerisms and how it feels, this feels more track-focused. This feels more like a driver's car, a race car, rather than the Super Tour or Grand Tour feel that you have with the DB12. The DB12 also has nicer materials on the dashboard and the door rest, whereas this, you have that Alcantara, you have the suede, you have that feeling of being in a car that is very capable on back roads or on track. And you also feel that with the steering wheel as well. Everything just feels very nicely placed for a car that is designed to go head-to-head with the 911. Now recently, Aston Martin has been hiring a lot of former Ferrari executives, mostly to compete in F1. But I don't know how much input they've had on the Vantage, but in a way, this car does kind of feel like a Ferrari Roma or a baby Ferrari Roma. And while it's not a direct competitor because the Vantage is about 6 to 7 inches shorter than that Grand Tour from Ferrari, it definitely has some attributes here, especially with the V8 and over 650 horsepower. There's a lot that I take away from this car thinking, you know what, Aston Martin is super serious about taking on not only Porsche, but Ferrari as well with this platform. Now we're going to go around this rotary one more time because I don't want to get behind that truck getting on the highway. But with the handling, it's so smooth and twitchy and very responsive. Now, like a lot of people have said, there's not a lot of feedback when you are in the corners, but I think, again, Aston Martin is trying to keep this car feeling very light on its feet. And you know, when you're buying a $200,000 car, that's not something I think a lot of people are going to be focusing on, especially with the Vantage, where it kind of blurs the line between being an on the edge of your seat experience sports car, but also being that Grand Tour. I'm still not sold on the idea of calling this a sports car quite yet. Most because of the way it manages that horsepower and performance. Also, something too that I didn't mention while I was walking around the car is that you also have a ZF 8-speed automatic transmission paired with this twin-turbo V8 from Mercedes-Benz, providing very crisp gear shifts and really provides that perception of being a very quick car in a straight line. I know some journalists prefer the PDK in the 911 and the dual clutch in the AMG GT, but with the ZF 8-speed, it's still very nice for sure. Also, I think the ZF 8-speed is a very good pairing with this powertrain as well. Now, suspension-wise, this is where it most certainly diverges compared to its larger sibling, the DB12, because the suspension is pretty firm, but I think it's manageable. It's most certainly dailyable. You most certainly feel the bumps, but for a car like this, you want to feel connected to the road and pavement. Very aggressive downshifts. So nice. Gotta place it in manual. And even though I am not pushing this car at all, this is probably maybe 4/10, 5/10. I'm probably not even going to its limits, anywhere close to its limits, I should say. You can tell what it's capable of. Its agility, its willingness to really take on anything you throw at it, whether it is the sharper corners on a back road or you're on the highway. Now, to answer my question that 656 horsepower is a bit too much for a car in this market, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It handles the power very well. The car isn't getting away from me at all. So intoxicating. I love the paddle shifters too. They feel really nice in the hands. But as I was saying before, I really feel like what the former Ferrari executives are doing here with Aston Martin is propelling this manufacturer to far new heights. And also, with the new CEO, this really feels like Aston Martin is moving in a completely different direction, a direction that they need to go in as well. Especially with Porsche, with what they're doing with the GT3 and GT3 RS, but also even in the world of motorsport. There's a lot of very good manufacturers, not only in F1, but also GT3 and GT4, that Aston Martin needs to really compete against. This is very intoxicating, especially with that twin-turbo V8, and I know a lot of people, including myself, I like the flat six in the 911, but this really truly does feel like a 911 fighter. But also, the longer I drive it, the less I experience those Grand Tour attributes that the predecessors had. And I think that with the 656 horsepower now, the 590 pound-feet of torque, you can have a heck of a lot more fun as well. But also I think, just as we talked about earlier on in this video, that with the exterior design, with the interior layout, this more cockpit and driver-centric interior, Aston Martin is really incentivizing their consumers to take this car to the track, to do things that maybe Aston Martin buyers didn't do in the past. And we saw that with the pre-facelifted model. That was such a huge shift from what Aston Martin was really all about prior to 2017. It was designed to draw in a younger consumer demographic, someone who wouldn't typically have purchased a Vantage in the past, someone who maybe have purchased a 911, a Cayman GT4, maybe even a more affordable Ferrari. And I think now you're starting to see that carryover where people are really going to be drawn in to the Vantage now with the newer technology, with the full digital gauge cluster, really embracing their own identity rather than being more of a parts bin for Mercedes-Benz. I also think, and I have experienced the AMG GT to a very minor extent, that this feels more sports car, race car oriented than the AMG GT, at least the GT55 that I have featured. The AMG GT55 felt a bit more luxurious, more Grand Tourer-like, and this doesn't have that same redundancy. So I think Aston Martin is trying to break away from the Mercedes-Benz mold. It feels so planted, the suspension, you feel low to the ground. And at least for me, I feel like I'm one with the chassis. And I feel connected to this car. Such a special experience. Also, on your digital gauge cluster, you have your blind spot detection right there, which is nice to have when you want to make quick lane changes. But also you have lane centering too. So you have that modern technology where if you're going to use this as a daily driver or a Grand Tourer, you can just relax and enjoy the driving experience. The 656 horsepower, 590 pound-feet of torque, the ZF 8-speed, and the twin-turbo V8. Just a harmonious blend. So all in all, has Aston Martin achieved making a 911 fighter? Well, time is only going to tell. But one thing I will say here is that this is no longer your father's or grandfather's Aston Martin. This is something far more, and also a car that to me is the complete package. Has a design, has a new technology, and even though the pricing is a bit higher than it was before with the $200,000 base price, compared to its rivals, compared to other vehicles in this market, especially vehicles that are front-engined and rear-wheel drive, to me this does undercut a lot of its competitors, especially the Ferrari Roma. I think the Ferrari Roma has to be in the conversation. Just the way this car drives, having driven the Roma before, this has a very similar characteristic to it on the roadways. But also, this is a huge departure from Bentley, because you could compare the Vantage to the Bentley Continental, and I don't think you can do that anymore. Aston Martin isn't banking on their brand. They're banking on their performance now. They're banking on the styling and their persona, and they're doing things much differently now that I think is, especially in 24, has to be done, but also really is propelling this manufacturer forward in ways that we just weren't experiencing 10, 15 years ago. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video of the 2025 Aston Martin Vantage. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys next time.